I thought saying it first would put me in control of what happened next. Who told him before I could? But he did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or reach for anything to hold on to. He just looked at me with the quietest eyes I had ever seen on him and told me someone else had already told him first. How long had I been performing a secret that was not even a secret anymore? I thought my honesty would put me in control, but the calm on his face that night told me I had already lost something I could not name. My name is Seraphine Voss. Sarah to anyone who knows me well enough. I am 33 years old, married to Daniel for 5 years, and I have been bored for 3 of them. Or so I told myself that spring, standing on the fire escape ledge at the hatch, reading messages on my phone with the careful pleasure of someone who believes she is finally getting what she is owed. The messages were from Marco, an account director at a partner agency. 3 in quick succession, each shorter and warmer than the last. I read them with my back to a closed service door and the city below the ledge, then tucked my phone away. The cracked corner of my phone case caught on the fabric the way it always did. I made a mental note to replace it. I never did. Daniel was not a bad man. He was attentive the way good furniture is attentive, solid, present, filling the correct space. He remembered our daughter Mia's appointments and asked how my day went with the sincerity of someone who actually wanted to know. I had begun to find his sincerity exhausting. Marco made attention feel like a gift rather than a habit, and I had decided this difference explained everything about both men. When I came home, Daniel set his book down and asked if it was just work people. I said yes. He nodded, then mentioned quietly that he had called at 9:15. I said the noise must have swallowed it. His eyes moved briefly to my jacket pocket and back, a small, unhurried inventory, and the movement sat uncomfortably in the room before I looked away. He asked what had changed on Thursday evenings, because I had come home twice this month with cedar smoke on my jacket, the kind from the hatch's rooftop fire pit. The question was precise and completely calm. I told him he had a talent for turning a normal night out into a police interview. He said he was asking a simple question. I changed the subject by asking whether Mia had eaten. Before sleep, I ran my accounting. Good mother, doing my job, disrupting nobody. I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. At 11:42, my phone lit up. An unknown number. The preview read, "Hi, this is Lena. I think we need..." Before the screen went dark. I turned the phone face down and lay in the dark for 2 hours without sleeping. The pharmacy at Belridge Chemists had the particular atmosphere of a place where people wait without wanting to. Thin, retractable lane dividers between them and everyone pretending not to notice each other. I was there on a Tuesday morning picking up a prescription for Mia when Priya appeared 2 spots behind me in the queue. Through the open automatic doors, diesel exhaust from an idling delivery truck pushed in every few seconds, and we stood in it and talked in the easy, overlapping way we always had since college. I told her I had been scattered but good. I used the word relief to describe Marco, as though I were describing a new coffee place rather than a decision I had been making for 4 months. And I watched Priya's face closely as I said it. She picked up her prescription bag and held it and told me she hoped I was being careful. I heard support. She had meant something closer to a warning. What I did not know at the time, though I assembled it much later from fragments, was that 2 nights before that pharmacy queue, Lena Reyes had called Daniel directly. The next morning he had been dressed before 6, which he had never done on a Wednesday. I had assumed an early work meeting. He had one. It was not about distribution logistics. Back at the office, a colleague named Tomas mentioned in passing that he had seen me at a wine bar in the Northern Quarter the previous Friday. Copper and salt, he said, naming it without drama because for him, there was no drama. I had told Daniel I was home tired that evening. I had been at that bar with Marco. Thomas moved on to a client deck within 30 seconds. 2 workstations away, Nadia Florescu looked up from her screen for a moment when the bar name landed, then looked back down without changing her expression. That evening, Daniel was at the kitchen island when I got home, looking at a page on his laptop he did not angle toward me. He asked, in the tone of someone narrating a fact, whether I had been at Copper and Salt the previous Friday, because our joint account showed a debit from that address at 9:47 in the evening, and I had mentioned being home tired, and he wanted to make sure he had the right memory. The trap was embedded in the practical. He asked specifically what the second charge, 20 minutes after the first, had been for, and why it appeared at the same address. I told him he was magnifying nothing. A glass of wine on the way home, forgotten, irrelevant. He said he was not making it anything. He was reading from a bank page. He said, without elevation, that he was starting to feel as though the things I described and the things that actually happened were two different maps of the same city, and that navigating by two maps was becoming difficult. I did not answer the question about the second charge. I asked whether he had eaten. He waited. Then, after I had moved past him to the refrigerator, he mentioned that he had moved his name alone onto the smaller savings account, the car emergency fund, and that going forward, he would manage those items separately. He said it was practical rather than personal. He looked at me once when he said it with the expression of someone delivering information rather than starting a fight, and then he went back to the bank page. I told myself it was passive aggression. I did not ask myself what had changed between last Tuesday and today that prompted him to separate that account. Priya called that night at 9. She asked how things were at home in a way that sounded like she was already holding additional information at a slight distance from the question. I gave her the easy version. Daniel was cold. Marco was the only person who made me feel real. She said, carefully, like someone placing a sentence down precisely, that she thought I should consider the long-term picture. I said she sounded like a therapy pamphlet. The call ended warmly enough, but with a quality in the silence before goodbye that I did not revisit until weeks later. After midnight, I walked through the kitchen for water and found Daniel at the island sorting envelopes into two neat stacks: utilities, bank statements, the car insurance renewal. I asked what he was doing at this hour. He said he was getting to paperwork he had been putting off. His wallet and his keys were in a different spot from where he always left them. Further left, near the edge, beside his phone, which was face down but clearly within arm's reach. I did not ask about the repositioning. I told myself he was just being tidy. On his open laptop, as I passed, a cloud sync notification was visible for 3 seconds before the screen went dark. File uploaded successfully. home_records_03. I saw it and did not know what to do with it, so I chose to do nothing. Claudia turned 60 at Terrace Rosso, a restaurant with pendant lights and shared plates and the particular warmth of a place where families have been eating together long enough to stop looking at the menu. 12 people around a long rectangular table, Daniel across from me rather than beside me, because Claudia had arranged the seating herself, which placed both of us in a clear sightline from every other chair. I arrived with the private sense that this was a performance I needed to pass rather than a celebration I was part of, and I had my first glass of wine faster than my second, which is the wrong order. I drank and watched Daniel talk to his mother with the ease of someone who has never had to perform ease for his own family, and I felt, with the sharp clarity of someone who has been rationalizing something for months, that I found his belonging here childlike. I meant it as a criticism. Looking back, it was a confession. The table was in that loose after-dessert energy, coffee being refilled, someone's story requiring hand gestures. When I said something that started as a response to a conversation about couple dynamics and turned quickly into a bit. I had done it before in smaller rooms and been rewarded with laughter, and I understood the structure of it, the setup, the pivot, the release. What I used for the pivot was a detail from early in our marriage, something Daniel had shared with me in the particular privacy of two people who are learning each other, a habit he had described once as meaningful to him. I presented it as the punchline to a question about what traditional men are like in practice, and I delivered it with the confidence of someone who had a clear read on the room. 3 people laughed. The laughter lasted 2 seconds and then came apart at the edges. Renata, my mother, laughed and covered her mouth immediately after as though she could take it back. Claudia said nothing. Way of someone who has decided that way, of someone who has decided that stillness is the only thing available to them right now. His sister Claire made direct eye contact with him from 4 seats away and held it. The conversation moved on, or tried to. Someone asked about Claudia's garden renovation. The table kept going. I interpreted the temperature drop as Daniel's failure to respond graciously, rather than as any consequence of my choice, and I reached for my wine with the steady hand of someone who believes they have read the situation correctly. In the parking garage afterward, our heels-on poured concrete and fluorescent strips humming in the low ceiling, Daniel asked to talk. He asked, without volume, what she meant by the joke. Not rhetorically. He said he wanted to understand why a private detail, something he had shared with her in a context of trust, had been appropriate material for his mother's birthday table, in front of his sister and a family friend who had known him since he was 12. He asked her to name one reason. Not an explanation. One reason. Why she thought that was the right call. He mentioned his mother's face. He mentioned the sound the laughter made when it stopped. He was calm in a way that was structurally different from indifference. He was calm the way someone is calm when they are recording. I told him he was reading it wrong, that the table laughed, that he was the only one upset. He said 3 people laughed for 2 seconds and his mother put down her fork, and that those were not the same thing. I said he was making it about his ego. He said he was asking about respect. Then he said, and said it with the flatness of someone delivering a final position, that he would not attend events where he was used as material without being told in advance. He said he would not ask her to stop being funny or social. He would ask her to keep their private life private. He added, in a voice that had moved past appeal into something that felt like documentation, that the version of him she described at that table was not him, and that people who love someone do not use their private shames as a punchline. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, in a register that had gone completely flat, he knew. The drive home was the specific quiet of 2 people who have both understood something and are choosing not to name it yet. At a red light, Marco's name appeared on my phone. I did not answer. Daniel did not look at my phone. He kept his eyes on the road. When we got home, he picked up the car insurance renewal from the hall table. It had been sitting there untouched for a week, and took it to the spare room. The light stayed on under the door for 11 minutes. When he came out, the letter was back on the hall table, opened, refiled, with a small coloured tab on the corner. He said goodnight from the hallway and went to bed. In the morning, his second pillow was in the spare room. He had not mentioned moving it. The next morning, Claudia called, and Daniel took the phone to the balcony with the door closed and stood with his back to the glass for 14 minutes, listening. The gym locker room at Fitcore smelled of eucalyptus cleaning spray and something sharper underneath it, and I met Priya there on a Thursday morning with a prepared version of events. I had done the work of making it sound reasonable, which is different from making it true, and I offered it to her with the confidence of a concession that costs nothing. I said I realized the joke at the dinner had been poorly timed. I used those 2 words specifically, poorly timed, because they acknowledged the surface without touching the substance. I told her I was going to suggest a double date with Marco and Lena, that presenting the friendship as a normal social expansion would put the whole thing to rest. I asked her to help me frame it to mutual friends. Priya held her gym bag and looked at me for a moment before she said clearly that she did not think that particular plan was a good idea right now. I heard caution. What she had actually heard 2 days earlier was more than I had told her, and the double date suggestion, made by me, received by her, filed in her memory with a timestamp, was already a data point she had not asked for and would not discard. At home that afternoon, I found Daniel moving a duffel bag into the spare room, easy and unhurried, the way someone moves something they packed days ago. He said he had been sleeping lightly and didn't want to disturb me. He hefted the bag through the door with one hand, and as the door came partially open, I saw, on the windowsill, a new phone charger still in its packaging, a notebook, and a printed calendar page for the current month with 2 dates circled in pen. The door closed. I stood in the hallway with a cold tea I did not drink. Later, he came to the kitchen while I was at the island and asked whether they could talk about the next few weeks, school pickup schedules, Mia's paediatrician appointment on the 14th, who was handling the mornings. He named the date, named the appointment, and then named 3 specific mornings earlier in the month when I had left without advance notice and he had managed drop-off alone. He named them from memory. He asked whether she could commit to the mornings that were hers on the shared calendar, not as a criticism but as a logistical question about their daughter's routine. His tone was the tone of someone who has stopped expecting anything beyond a practical answer. Then he sat across from her at the island and said he wanted to say one more thing, once. He wanted to know whether there was someone specific she had been spending time with outside work. Not the full history, he said, just whether there was someone. He said he was not asking to control anything, but because he would rather receive a truth from her than construct one from other sources. He used the phrase other sources with a weight that was completely deliberate. And then he said, if she told him honestly now, they could decide together what came next. If she didn't, he would figure it out regardless, and the path forward would be different. I told him I was not going to be interrogated in my own kitchen. He nodded. He took his coffee to the spare room, and the door clicked shut with the particular loudness of a sound that makes no noise. 3 days later, we collected Mia from kindergarten separately, arriving within 2 minutes of each other, standing 5 feet apart in the parent line without touching. Mia came through the school door holding a painting and walked toward Daniel first, not because she loved him more, but because he was the one who always crouched to her height. On the walk to the cars, she asked, in the uncomplicated syntax of a 5-year-old who has been absorbing the temperature of every room she walks through, whether Sarah and Daddy were fighting. I said we were just busy. Daniel told her that grown-ups sometimes need to talk about boring things and that it had nothing to do with how much they both loved her. He said it simply and she accepted it, and they pulled out of the car park while I stood beside my own car and watched. That evening I checked our shared streaming account out of habit. 1 fewer device was registered than the day before. His laptop was gone from the list. He had already begun something I had no framework for yet, and the specific quality of that absence, not dramatic, not announced, just done, stayed with me through the night and into a morning where the spare room door was closed and the new charger on the windowsill was plugged in and the blue binder on the desk, labelled Utilities, was noticeably thicker than utility bills need to be. I went back to the fire escape ledge at the hatch because the familiarity of a place can feel like control even when everything else is moving. The city was the same below the ledge. The spring air had turned cooler. A delivery truck was idling below, and the diesel came up in waves, and I stood in it and called Marco because I needed the conversation to go a particular way. It did not go that way. He said these things sometimes happened, and she should not panic. He said it in the careful tone of someone managing his own separate situation, and I heard underneath the words the sound of a man who had already begun reorganizing his priorities and was being polite about the order. I hung up and looked at my cracked phone case, which now had a second fracture running from the corner toward the center from a drop in the car park 2 days ago, and I had still not replaced it. What I did next felt, at the time, like protecting myself. I opened a group message thread with Priya, Nadia, and 2 other women from our extended circle, and I sent them a long message about Daniel, that he had become emotionally unavailable and controlling, that he was punishing my independence, that he had consulted someone at a law and mediation office called Parker and Walsh, that she was barely holding things together. I included the detail about the appointment because I wanted them to understand the stakes. I wanted them to receive my version before any other version reached them. and I sent it with the confidence of someone who has always been able to shape a room. Priya read it and took a screenshot and did not reply. Nadia sent a supportive emoji and also took a screenshot. I interpreted Priya's silence as care for me. I did not consider where either screenshot would eventually go. I also posted to my social media that afternoon a story, public-facing, about people who cannot handle women who know their own worth. And it went out to 43 followers, which included Nadia, two of Daniel's firm's colleagues who had followed her from a shared industry event, and Lena Reyes, who had been following my account quietly since before the phone call to Daniel. Priya called privately rather than responding in the thread. She said, in her work voice, the measured one she uses when precision matters, that she was not going to be part of the message campaign. She said she cared about me, but she had heard more than one version of the situation and could not keep pretending she had only heard one. I asked her whose version. She did not answer that directly. She said I should talk to Daniel honestly before this became something that could not be walked back. I told her she was choosing sides. She said she was being honest, which was what I had always said I valued. The call ended. I felt a sharp and useless anger, cleaner than fear, and told myself she had been turned. Daniel came home at 6:45 and set his bag in the hallway with the unhurried precision of someone who has been completely still somewhere for several hours. He asked whether they could talk tonight and said it was important. He sat across from her in the living room and named specific dates. 3 evenings, 1 overnight, he had managed alone with Mia. One morning where she had come home from a work event that did not appear on the company's shared calendar. He named them all from memory. Then he referenced a hotel booking confirmation, date, hotel name, reference number, that had been sent to an address attached to their shared streaming account, and he asked, without raising his voice, whether the man she was with at that hotel had a wife, and whether that wife had ever been in contact with Sarah. I looked at him for a moment and understood, clearly, that he was not asking because he did not know. He was asking because he wanted to see whether she would tell him the truth when the truth was the last thing she had left to offer. I told him that his investigation was finished, that I was not going to be cross-examined in my own living room, and that if he had a problem, he should take it to whoever he had been speaking to at that law office. I said law office to show him I knew about Parker and Walsh. He nodded once and said he hoped she understood that this was the last time he would ask. I said good. He said it back, without cruelty, and stood up. He went to the spare room. No door slam, just the gentle certainty of a click. After several minutes of silence, I heard the soft beep of a phone alarm being set, and then a drawer opened and closed. In the morning, the duffel bag that had been beside the spare room door was inside. The new charger was plugged in, and the phone was charged. The blue binder on the writing desk, labelled Utilities, thicker than any utility file needs to be, sat in the middle of the desk rather than at the edge, as though it had been handled recently and placed back with intention. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door carefully, and the care I took not to make noise was the first honest physical response I had managed in weeks. The third-floor reception terrace of Meridian Tower was the kind of room that had been designed to make people feel important. Glass on 2 sides, catering tables along the inner wall, a check-in desk staffed by someone in a name badge lanyard. I signed in at 6:30 and moved toward the drinks table with the ease of someone who knows where the light falls best. I had dressed with thought. I had slept badly, but I carried it well, which I had always been able to do. Nadia was already there. Priya arrived 10 minutes later. Both of them greeted me and positioned themselves with what I now understand was precision. Sightlines to the door, to the check-in desk, to me. Daniel arrived at 6:52 with a woman I did not recognize. Mid-40s, a professional blazer, a document folder under her arm. She signed in on a visitor pass and did not take a drink. She stayed near the entrance. Daniel found my face across the room and held eye contact for a moment with the stillness of a dial tone. Functional, final, absolute. The woman crossed the room to me. She said her name, confirmed mine, and handed me a sealed envelope and a cover document with a case reference number at the top and a hearing date 14 days out. She said the words that made it formal. She stepped back. The room went quiet in sections, outward from where I stood, as understanding moved through it, the way understanding moves through any room that has just been handed a fact it cannot revise. I performed shock and outrage because that was the only tool left. I said this was unbelievable, that he had done this here deliberately, that I had done nothing wrong. The room did not reorganize itself around me. Nadia turned toward the catering table. 2 colleagues stepped back. I looked at Priya and asked directly whether she was going to say something. She said she had submitted a statement because she was asked to and because she thought it was the right thing to do. She said she was sorry that it hurt, and she meant it, but she did not move toward me. Daniel passed me on his way to collect his coat. He said, low enough that only she could hear, that he had heard it from someone else first. Not with anger, with the tone of a final answer. He picked up his coat, and he left. In the elevator lobby, I opened the cover document. The evidence attached to the petition included a hotel booking confirmation, 6 joint account transaction records by date and amount, a location log provided by Lena Reyes, and a voluntary witness statement from Priya Menon, confirming the content and timing of a group message I had distributed 5 days earlier. I read Priya's name twice. The elevator button left a small smudge from my thumb, which had ink on it from gripping the envelope, and I had not noticed until that moment. What I understood, in the elevator going down, was not guilt and not remorse. It was something more mechanical and more permanent. The things I thought were invisible, the card charges, the location gaps, the birthday dinner joke, the group message sent in a panic, were not invisible at all. They were readable. They had been read. The confidence I had mistaken for power had made me louder and less careful at exactly the same time. The audience I had always performed for had been watching, and some of them had been writing things down. 14 days later, I was back in the pharmacy queue at Belridge Chemists. Same lane dividers, same fluorescent light, picking up Mia's prescription. I paid with my personal card. On my phone was an email from a mediation coordinator with the confirmed session date. Marco had texted 3 days after the event to say things were complicated and he thought they should take space. He signed it with his full name. The joint credit line was frozen. The family car was in Daniel's name and temporarily his alone. My social story about women who know their own worth had 42 likes, and none of them were from anyone who had been standing in that reception room. I walked out into the street. The delivery truck was idling at the curb, the same diesel smell, the same spring air. I got into the rental car, which was smaller than what I was used to, and I drove.